Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sovereign Lovestream.
Hi, happy Sovereign Sunday, and thank you for joining us this week.
Yeah, another exciting episode of Sovereign Lovestream. So we were planning today's episode this morning, and we were intending to talk about tips to live your best life. And then as we were doing laundry before the show, we had a trigger fest and got into an argument. And, it's funny because a lot of times during the show, maybe not a lot of times, but there are times during the show or right before the show where we'll get into an argument and then work it out quickly because the pressure of the show is on us, right? And we work it out quickly. It kind of motivates us. And then we end up talking about what the argument on the show. Sometimes we scrap the topics last minute. So that's what happened this morning. We were writing out these tips about living our best life and just kind of taking the stuff that we've been doing because honestly, we've been having a really great time lately. I'm just going to check the sound. Check. All right. Yeah, it looks good. So we've been having a really good time. So we were like, let's share some of our tips and then the argument.
Just so you can see how committed we are to this show, that we're even the universe is throwing arguments our way as topics, because really this morning we were not sure what we were going to talk about, and we had come up with an interesting topic, but it seems like this is a lot more I would think perhaps a lot more helpful, just because it does happen. We have we do have these petty arguments at times, and sometimes it seems silly. Like, how is it that after all of this work that we've done, we are still having stupid little arguments that having stupid little arguments that seem to make no sense, but there's a lot behind it. So that's kind of what we're going to dive into today, about what's behind some of these things that seem like petty little arguments, these trigger fests. Like, why are we being triggered? Is it necessary to have a safe space and avoid the triggers? And that's going to be our topic today.
Yeah, and I think it's also good in the sense that, like, we had a date night last night. We went out to dinner at the Coney Island Boardwalk. We had dinner at this really nice, fancy restaurant on the terrace overlooking the beach and the Coney Island rides, and it was very romantic, and we had a great night.
Yeah.
We came home, we made love. It was really a beautiful night. And then, like, the next morning, we wake up and we're still lovey-dovey, and then as we're going to do laundry, just like this normal routine thing, the trigger pops up, right? And so we could be tempted to be like, F this. I'm so sick of these triggers. And this is just a part of life. This happens. And honestly, I have to be honest that, so we'll get into the trigger and the argument itself. But while I was there waiting for the laundry, we were arguing, and Vanessa got up and walked away. She came back to the house, and I was just sitting there, and I'm thinking, you know what? I don't feel like doing the show today. I'm just going to cancel it. You know what? It's not a big deal. It's up to me. I can decide whether or not, if I don't feel like doing the show, I don't have to do the show this week.
That's funny because I had the same feeling.
I know you did, because I know you.
Well, I was thinking, like, how are we going to do a show about living our best life when, look at us, we're just arguing over stupid stuff.
So we were arguing over laundry. So I'm putting the laundry in. Vanessa's getting changed for the machine. We live in Brooklyn, so we don't have laundry in our building. So we have to go across the street to the laundromat. And she's getting changed from the machine, and I'm putting the laundry in. And I kind of shout across I'm like, do you want me to put the towels in with the sheets? So the white sheets, we have white sheets. The white sheets were already in with the whites. But there were a couple of pillowcases and like a blanket that we use at the beach so that's what I meant when I said the sheets. I meant the thing for the beach and the pillowcases, but I didn't realize it was just pillowcases. I thought it might be Xander's sheets that are gray. So I was like, should I put them all in together? And she was like, just like confused. And
I was like, what sheets? Like in my mind, I'm like, the sheets are already in the machine, so he's not gonna stuff towels in there. The machine was full enough. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like they're already separated into piles. All you have to do is put each pile into a machine. What's and I don't know what the question was.
And I was having the exact same feeling. I'm like, what's so hard about this question? Do the sheets go in with the towels or not? And it was a sincere question. I really was just a little like confused. I mean, I could have just done it my way. I mean, I've been doing laundry. I've lived on my own since I'm 19. So I've been doing my own laundry for 20 something years. So I would have had no problem. But in my mind, I'm like, I know she's very particular about how the laundry gets done. So let me ask her. I think I'm being considerate by asking you instead of just doing what I want to do. And then she's like, what? And I sincerely meant it. I really didn't mean it to be condescending. But after we discussed it, I realized, yeah, it does sound condescending. I was like, what is so hard? What is so difficult to understand about what I'm asking? Sheets and towels or separate? What's the problem? Right? And she got very, you tell them.
Well, at that point, I walked over and I took the towels out and I said, they're pillowcases. There are no sheets in here. It's just pillowcases and the beach blanket. Like, that's not, to me, those aren't bed sheets. So when he's asking about sheets, I'm thinking bed sheets. No, the bed sheets are already in the machine. These are just two gray pillowcases and the beach blanket.
A pillowcase. I mean, I didn't realize it was just pillowcases because it could have. It
could have been part of the set with the sheets,
right? And it was just wrapped up with the towels, and I just couldn't see it all, so it just looked to me like sheets and towels, right?
So I said that, and I was like, okay, and then we just put the laundry in. We finished, but I was irritated,
and I was fine. I walked out of the laundromat ahead of her. I was fine. I was standing outside in the sun, and then she comes out.
So I'm irritated by the question, by what's so difficult to understand about this question, which in I guess maybe my insecurities, the thought was, he's telling me I'm an idiot and don't understand his question. But what is there to understand? I mean, there are 3 piles of clothes. Just put 1 pile in each machine. That's it. There's nothing else. There's nothing else that needs to be separated right now. So I come back out and we were going to get breakfast. So I'm asking, like, so what do you want to do for breakfast? And he's looking at me like he's ready to hug me. And I'm like, I need to get this off my chest because I'm annoyed by this comment.
She gets very tense. So when she's angry, I know she's angry. Or when she's upset about something, I know it because her body is very tense. So as she came out of the laundromat, I went to put my arms around her to hug her. And she's like, like stiff as a board. I'm like, what's wrong?
So I did tell his confusion and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to be vulnerable right now. And I'm going to tell you that it really got under my skin when you said, I don't understand what's so difficult about this question. And I said, it seems like a condescending comment to make. Like, if you're confused about where to put the laundry, ask, where do I put the laundry? Does anything else need to be separated? But don't ask what's so confusing or what's so difficult about this question, because that implies that I'm not intelligent enough to understand your question. And in that moment is where things got all out of control.
It evolved into an argument. Yeah. So I'm like, it's just words. I was not intending to be sarcastic. I was not intending to be condescending. Yes, I understand the phrase I chose, right? So what I said was, who used that phrase in your life that like used to trigger you so much? Maybe me in the past. I've used it in a condescending way. Somebody must have used that phrase in a condescending way, because I honestly didn't mean it condescendingly. I was just confused. I was just like, I don't understand where the miscommunication is here. So I mean, I guess we'll get into how to deconstruct that and kind of analyze that, right?
Yeah.
So finish the telling the story.
What I was expecting to hear was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that in a condescending way. I was really just confused about the laundry, and that was it. I thought that would be that. Me saying, hey, this thing, the way you said it sounded condescending. Did you I was kind of hurt by the way you said that, and it really like triggered me in that moment. And instead it turned into, is it really condescending? Is it, if I didn't say it in that tone?
Well, then we start parsing it, right? I'm just like, it's just words. I chose a bunch of words to communicate an idea, and to me it's the tone with which it's said. But we realize that, right, maybe in that moment, because she was triggered, she thought I was being condescending, so her hackles got up, she tensed up like a board. And so now I could have said, honey, I love you, and it would have sounded like sarcasm or like I was mocking her, right? Like sometimes,
I don't know that if you had said, honey, I love you, I would have been like, no, you don't, you liar.
I don't know about that.
I don't know. I don't think so. I was expecting some kind of empathetic response. And it seemed like instead what wound up happening is that we started determining whether it was really condescending or not. We started arguing
debating,
over whether it was a condescending comment or not. And it got to the point where I was frustrated because what I felt was that I wasn't being heard. I was saying I was hurt by your comment, and it seemed like you were being condescending to me. I don't like that. And instead, we were discussing whether it was condescending or not. And so it got to a point where I was like, listen, you're going to tell me right now that anything I say, because he was telling me you're really upset right now, you were triggered, so your judgment is kind of skewed right now. And we can't, almost like, I don't remember if you exactly said we can't trust your judgment right now or something to that effect.
I said your point of view, you were saying that I was dismissing your point of view, and I was saying I'm not dismissing your point of view. I'm just saying it's tainted by the trigger. So, I mean, is that not true? Was I not right about that? Like, not that I'm trying to be right, but just like I can learn something new right now.
Yeah.
Isn't that true? That like I'm of the belief, because partially what I believe you've been trying to teach me and others is that when you get triggered, the problem is inside you. The problem is not the outside world.
Correct.
Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
But when we're working with someone else and you're saying, I'm triggered by this thing, I feel hurt by this thing, the first thing to be able to allow the other person to hear you is to empathize. Right? If you're going to sit there and say, all right, well, you're the one that was triggered, so where did this start? Let's psychoanalyze this because it wasn't my fault. Let's worry about where you got triggered initially. That's not going to result in a very, in me being as vulnerable going forward. If instead you say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trigger you, I didn't mean to say that to hurt you, because that has happened also where you'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way, and then I'm like, oh, I know that it wasn't, you weren't intending to hurt me, and now I want to just look at why this hurt me so much. What did this trigger? What was the memory? What was the core trauma that caused me to react this way? And then we can continue working on it from there. But without that initial empathy, it's a lot harder, because now we started getting into this argument over, well, was it really condescending? Did I mean it that way? Was that my intention? If I didn't mean it, then it's really just your problem. I don't know why you're bringing it to me in this case, because it's not my problem. It's not my fault. It's your issue.
All right. Well, I wasn't trying to say it's your issue, go deal with it. Like, maybe it's not obvious. So I was not intending to send you packing and say, go deal with your stuff and then come back. I guess in that moment, all right, fine. You did not feel empathized with.
Yes.
So even though I felt like, oh, no, I wasn't trying to be, I don't remember if I specifically said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you thought I was being condescending or that you felt condescended, because I didn't mean that. If I focused a little bit more on that part, she would have felt heard, and then she would have relaxed a little bit. The tension would have been released, and now we could have had a discussion about, oh, wow, so what was it about that phrase that was so upsetting to you?
Yeah, and I think that in the past, this has been an issue between us. Danny can empathize. He just doesn't know necessarily how to express the empathy. So there are many times where we've had arguments, or I'll be upset about something and Danny's like, okay, I'll fix it. And I'm like, no, I don't want you to fix it. I don't want you to go do something. I want comfort right now. That's what I'm looking for. I'm expressing my feelings because I'm looking for empathy, for comfort. And he's like, well, if I'm fixing it, it's because I care about you. So therefore, there's the empathy. Like, what needs to be said at this point? And I think that's the step that we sometimes miss.
Right. If you remember the movie White Men Can't Jump with Woody Harrelson and Wesley Snipes, and Rosie Perez is Woody Harrelson's girlfriend, and they're in bed, and she's like, I'm thirsty. And he gets up and he goes and he brings her a glass of water. And she's like, no, you dummy. I don't want you to, when I say I'm thirsty, I don't want you to bring me a glass of water. I want you to tell me, honey, I too know what it's like to be thirsty.
Exactly.
And that's something that I've had a hard time with too, because in the movie, Woody Harrelson is like, you're fucking crazy. If you say you're thirsty, I'm going to bring you some water so you're not thirsty anymore. What's wrong with that? And on the surface, there isn't anything wrong with that, obviously. But the idea is that you want to empathize first with the feelings that are happening, because then they'll be more open to whatever solutions.
Exactly.
All right, we solved it. Episode over. Thank you.
And I mean, we did actually afterwards have this conversation. So I was like, you know what? You can't hear me. You're not even willing to empathize with me right now. I'm leaving. Forget it. Do laundry yourself. And I came back upstairs.
And I was like, this bitch.
And then
I'm not doing the show today.
So I messaged my best friend and I'm like crying at this point. And I'm like, I don't even understand why I'm crying. It's not that big of a deal. It's not the end of the world. But it was just this, to be in this frustrating place of not feeling like I wasn't being heard. And yeah, also feeling the pressure of like, oh my God, we have to go do this live stream about happy couples and look at us fighting over laundry. This doesn't make any sense. Fighting over what sheets are. Like,
what's the definition of sheets?
Is it
pillowcases are included in the set, so those are sheets.
Those are not sheets.
They are sheets. They're part of the sheets umbrella.
So then I was like, wow, you know, my best friend was like, isn't it funny that you guys have been together for so many years and look at how language is such a major factor, because we have two different understandings of what sheets are, right? For me, they're just bed sheets. It's the flat sheet and the fitted sheet. Those are the sheets, and the pillowcases are pillowcases. So to me, when
should we take a poll? Let's take a poll.
But, you know, that created a confusion in that conversation, because if he had said, well, there are these gray sheets in here, I would have said, oh, those are just two pillowcases. That's it. But he used that phrase that like really made me feel like, why is he getting an attitude with me, telling me what's so difficult about the question? So then afterwards discussing it, you did admit that it is kind of like a meme that people use, right. And usually they are meaning it in a condescending way. Yes,
generally speaking, if somebody's going to say what's so hard to understand, yeah, that definitely could be interpreted. In meme culture, it is a condescending meme, and I could have chosen, and I think this is an important point about how to mitigate these conflicts, is choosing your words more carefully, right? If I would have said, honey, there's some gray, it looks like there's some gray sheets in here. Should I put them in with the towels? The towels are also gray. Or should I separate them? Then she would have realized, she would have said, gray sheets. Oh yeah, it's just a couple of pillowcases. You can throw that in with the towels. No big deal. Problem solved, right? Clear communication. Evan made the comment before, women are from Mars, men are from Venus. We speak, and this goes to what you were saying about speaking different languages. Words have different meanings. To you, sheets just means the flat and the fitted. To me, sheets means the whole set, right? Okay. So we've got different language. If we are more clear in our language, instead of just using memes or phrases or sayings that we're just kind of in the habit of using, we can communicate more effectively, right? And if I were to say, I'm confused, I'm just asking about this, and I don't know, you know, if I would have just expressed my confusion a little bit more clearly, it might have not have devolved into that. I also want to just pop this up here. Cynthia, she's saying she wishes we had a living in the moment genuine resource to guide us along. You do, Cynthia. We all do. We all have it inside. I mean, we're not special. We're not gurus who you need to have on your shoulder to like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and I mean this, I love Cynthia. I know her in real life and we're friends, and I love you. And I think that we all have this. We have this intuitive guide inside. I would call it our soul. You know, different traditions call it different things. But I absolutely believe that we do have this guide inside. And the problem is that it's the egos that are the ones clashing, right? Because your ego's job is ultimately to keep you safe. The trouble with the ego is that it's a little savage sometimes. It doesn't see distinctions. We've talked about the reptilian brain on the show before, where it only kind of sees in these shadowy figures, like someone to be nurtured by. So how your parents, parental figures, right? Your loved ones or your mate, your spouse. It sees like the person you want to mate with, and it sees threats. There's 5 distinctions. I don't remember them all, but it sees threats, people you are either going to attack or retreat from. And so because that vision is blurry, it can change like that. So one minute we're like, oh, lovey-dovey, I love you. We had a great date night last night. Let's go do laundry together. It's so romantic. And the next minute she says something that, or I ask a question, she responds in a way that I don't like. My ego's like,
she's a threat.
enemy, threat, throw up defenses. So now And
he literally said that during our fight. He said, yeah, I was like, I was just trying to tell you what upset me. And he said, yeah, well, you were attacking me. You were blaming me and attacking me. And
because at the moment I was like, you're blaming me for your trigger. If triggers are internal, it's you reacting to probably not even what's actually happening. It's something in the past. And you have a meaning assigned to the phrase. What was the phrase?
What's so difficult?
What's so difficult to understand, right? We have a meaning assigned to that. Sarcasm and condescension. So you're not reacting to me in the moment, what I'm trying to communicate. You're reacting to your past association of definition to that phrase. So your ego said, he's being condescending. He's a threat.
Well, yeah, because that's generally how people use the expression. So if you're using an expression,
I'm not saying it was irrational. I'm not saying it was irrational or illogical for you to make that association. I'm just saying that's not actually what was happening in that moment. And that's how the ego works. It uses the past because its ultimate goal is just to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And sometimes it wants to keep us safe from the people we love, from the people we're in partnerships with, from our parents, from our children, right? Like, that is what gets in the way of pure love, pure communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there are times, and it's helpful for us at times to take that space away. And I was kind of laughing afterwards because he came back and I was in the kitchen and he says to me, "Are you done being angry now?" And I wanted to throw a frying pan at him. Because I was like, what type of question is that? So instead I said, "Do you mean that you'd like to talk about this?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, let's have a conversation about it." But we do get into these defense modes, and so we start responding in our defenses. We try to make sure that we are right or that we prove our point.
I wanna address this comment. No, getting offended is not a sign of spiritual maturity. I think as we grow, we are less offended, especially in a close, very intimate relationship, or to the degree that your relationship is intimate, you will be less offended. At the same time, I think we have to be willing to be offended, right? We have to be willing to be vulnerable enough where we risk getting offended so that we can deepen the connection, right? If we're always on guard against each other so we're not offended, that's not spiritual maturity, right? That's kind of like a counterfeit. In my previous marriage, we didn't really offend each other because we didn't really communicate on a deep level. And ultimately, that's why the marriage fell apart. There was relative peace to the outside world. It looked like we had a nice, peaceful relationship, but there was also no intimacy. So I think it's not a matter of that being offended is the sign of spiritual maturity, because I think as you become more and more spiritually mature, you won't be offended as much. But I also think you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing and put yourself in the place where you might be offended. And you will be, because none of us are perfect. So you will be offended, even in the most perfect relationship ever.
Yeah, I mean, we all have childhood traumas from past relationships, past experiences. We have associations, we have cultural differences that cause certain things at times to seem offensive. And I think the real point of this episode was more so to discuss the fact that sometimes triggers are good. We did an episode recently about rocking the boat and triggering each other and why it's so important. We kind of live in this culture that looks at things that as two extremes, right? There's the I'm triggered and I need a safe space, so nobody say anything that could possibly trigger me. And that is completely unhealthy, because if you don't look at your triggers, you're never going to heal from those triggers or from those traumas. And there's the idea that there are no safe spaces. If you're triggered, it's your own problem and you deal with it on your own. And while I understand that we don't have the responsibility to heal every single person that we come into contact with, if you are in a partnership, if you are in a family relationship, any type of dynamic where you care about the person, I think that it is beneficial to work through the triggers together, to create when we brought up the triggers versus a safe space, and by safe space, we don't mean a safe space where you're not triggered. We mean a safe space where we can discuss the triggers. So I come to him and say, this is really, this seemed like you were being condescending to me, and it really got under my skin that you said it this way. Now we can have a conversation where he's like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. Honestly, it was the first thing that popped into my head, and I didn't mean it to be condescending. And it's okay, I can understand that. I have associated this meaning to it because as I've seen it in culture, as people normally use that phrase, it sounds like a condescending remark. So either we agree that you don't speak to me that way because I don't like the association behind it, or we work through understanding that you're not condescending. You don't view me as less than or less intelligent than you. So let's find a better way to communicate more effectively. One of the 4 agreements is, I was
just thinking that,
is be impeccable with your word. There's my sister says this to her kids: say what you mean and mean what you say. Be clear about what you're saying, and you're a lot less likely to have miscommunications and misunderstandings if you're impeccable with your word. And that doesn't mean that overnight, boom, you say everything perfectly. It just means that if you do say something that you didn't actually mean, be willing to say, oh wait, I didn't actually mean that. I meant to say something else. Or what I was telling him was, you could have simply said, I was confused. I don't understand because I think these are sheets in here. If I'm saying, what sheets are you talking about? Just say there's gray sheets in here. And I would have said, oh no, those are just pillowcases. Throw them in. No big deal. That would have been it. And yes, exactly. As we
love that Jennifer Grey profile picture, by the way.
As we work through those triggers, we start learning how to respond to these things in a better way. And yeah, at first we're gonna flop and fall on our faces and at times get into big arguments. This argument was really resolved in 15 minutes. It wasn't the end of the world. And we're not implying that this argument was this huge thing, but it was a perfect example of how these things can get out of hand. Just a slight miscommunication, a slight response of defensiveness can escalate into something much bigger. And in the past, these types of arguments would cause us to be mad at each other for days over stupid things, because we would then get into the technicalities. Well, I think sheets are just the sheets, and no, well, the pillowcases are part of the sheets. And now,
well, what is the definition of the word is? We could go the Clinton route, or be. What was the word? It was is, right?
So that's exactly, that's the point of this, is to say that triggers are healthy. It's normal to be triggered by your partner. It's normal to have miscommunications. I mean, we've been together for so many years and we're still miscommunicating over what sheets are.
Right. I mean, this was a learning experience, right? And that's really what triggers should be. let's talk a little bit about safe spaces, because I mean, you mentioned before this kind of cancel culture idea of safe spaces, which is unhealthy. This idea that we need to, it's funny because I've been thinking about this and how it's related to this idea that they want to vaccinate for everything, like, or like cleanse the world around us, right?
Of bacteria.
Yeah. And it's like where terrain theory is, if you're exposed to everything, you develop immunity to it. And this kind of works the same way. When you're exposed to the triggers, every trigger is a learning experience for both sides, right? She got triggered. I learned, oh, that phrase is triggering to her. And she learned something about her experience, right? We both learned. And I learned also, again, for the billionth time, empathize first, then provide the solution. So to Cynthia's comment, safe spaces can be deadening in the sense that if you're never exposed to anything, and then you go out into the real world, it's maybe not deadening, but in the sense, like you'd be so oversensitive, right? You'd be so sensitive to every little thing because you've been protected for all that time. It's like growing up in a rubber room, and then you go out and the first time you trip, it's like a major injury because you've been in a rubber room your whole life. With that said, I think the idea of safe spaces, like for people of color, this may, and you can chime in as a woman of color, obviously. My kind of feeling about this is, I think that there do need to be safe spaces in some sense where, like, in a world for people of color where they're surrounded by so many white people. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but like, right, sometimes you just need to be around people who think like you. Forget about race, right? Like for me as an anarchist, it's hard to be around statists all the time talking about voting, whether it's for Trump or Biden. It doesn't matter to me. They're both statists. They both want to take away at least some of my freedom in certain areas. And it's hard for me to constantly be around statists talking about, yeah, I can't wait to vote. And I want a law passed to stop this or to allow that.
Or I want to call the cops on this person. I want to call the cops on that person.
Yeah, so that's hard for me. Sometimes I want to just be around anarchists where I don't have to feel like, oh, I'm constantly hearing about laws and voting and politicians and politics. I'm not interested in that, right? So I like to be around anarchists. I think those types of safe spaces are beneficial, not to live in all the time. Although an argument could be made for moving to an anarchist community and living that way. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, I'm in Brooklyn, we're in Brooklyn, and we are surrounded by statists. And they're some of the most hardcore zealot statists you're ever going to meet. It's crazy, the conflicts that are in our neighborhood group over statism is very stressing to me and very difficult to deal with. Anyway, sorry. That was a little bit of a tangent. But I mean, I think I don't want to throw out the term safe spaces and say safe spaces are never good and we should never have them. We all need a break sometimes, right? So whether you're a person of color who needs a break from white people, or an anarchist who needs a break from statists, or whatever it is, or a spiritual person who needs a break from non-spiritual people, or a non-spiritual person who needs a break from spiritual people. Sometimes we all need a break.
Yeah.
So safe spaces are not all bad. Okay.
Yeah, and as I was saying, the idea of safe spaces within a relationship just means that we can talk these things out, and that doesn't necessarily mean that in the future we can't say certain things because it might be triggering to the other person. The majority of the time when we experience triggers, we like to talk about it. I mean, I tend to say, like, this thing happened to me today and I feel like it really triggered me because of this or that. It triggered this memory. And I think that's another thing that we're misunderstanding in terms of the word trigger, right? This idea of, oh, you're triggered, you're too sensitive, you can't. For me, it triggers a memory. That's what the trigger is. It triggered a memory from my childhood of something or from my past that was never resolved. And now I realize how that affects me as an adult, or how that affects me today, where somebody said something and it made me feel that way. So now let me look at that. Let me work through it so I can release it. And then going forward, somebody says that again, I'm not bothered by it. And this idea of dismissing things because, oh, this doesn't feel good, let me just ignore it. It's just going to keep building and building and building. And next time somebody says something, you're going to freak out about it again.
Yeah. Emily said, I thought this channel was supposed to be about freedom and voluntarism. It is. We're both voluntarists, and part of being free is being free from negative emotions, free from just negativity in your relationships. We believe that unfettered communication, unfettered love between us is the ultimate freedom. And, it's being free like Bob Marley said, free yourself from mental slavery. Well, I would say also free yourself from emotional slavery. And that's what we're doing. We're no longer slaves to our egos. We appreciate the fact that our egos try to keep us safe. Sometimes our egos are misguided, and we need to rein them back in and say, okay, this isn't really a danger. She's not attacking me. I don't have to fight back. She's expressing something that hurt her. I can empathize with that hurt, and then we can work through that, and then we won't have that trigger again in the future. Or eventually, sometimes it takes some practice before you totally give up a trigger, or heal a trigger, I should say. But this is all part of personal sovereignty, of your individual spiritual sovereignty, of your soul being free, and then our two free souls coming together and creating a partnership, co-creating it, and being free within that partnership. Then we can create, like Yvonne said, a tribe of free souls. And that tribe becomes a community, and that community becomes a people, right? That's how we spread freedom, is starting with ourselves and then moving outwards, rather than trying to convince everybody else, you need to be free, you need to be free, you need to be free, and working backwards. I mean, I'm not saying you can't tell people about freedom, of course, obviously, that there's nothing wrong with that. But your primary focus, at least what we believe, is that your primary focus should be freeing yourself, and then you can show other people the way. You won't have to preach to them.
And I think a lot of us, it takes years for a lot of us to realize that we're not free if we're still carrying a lot of emotional baggage, a lot of childhood traumas. Those things are keeping us from being free. And that's why the outside world kind of comes at us in a way where we feel we're the victims of everything. We're only the victims in as much as we allow ourselves to be the victims.
Somebody made that comment before, actually. Somebody had said they had lived with a sociopath, and Emily said it. So unless the person was your parent, which you couldn't escape from if you were too young, you chose to stay with them, and you absolutely can control that. So that goes to what you were just saying.
Yeah. There's so much. And even when we leave traumatic relationships, abusive relationships, if you don't release all of that trauma, you carry it with you, and you continue to remain in an abusive relationship because you're carrying all of that trauma with you. And it's a hard pill to swallow at times, to realize that you are many times the cause of your own unhappiness. And we've realized that in so many ways, working through a lot of our triggers in our relationship, especially in a relationship, your partner is always going to trigger a lot of your core wounds. Yeah.
And this is absolutely true. Excuse me. In the beginning of our relationship, I would say that I was significantly less emotionally intelligent than I am now. So I was not very skilled. I was kind of a bully. I was used to getting my way in relationships. I expressed how my first wife, she never really argued with me. We didn't have a lot of intimacy, so there weren't a lot of arguments, but she just let me have my way all the time. And I carried that into other relationships. And so I was just used to having these relationships where I always got my way. I didn't even realize I was bullying them, or just the fact that I had a bigger personality than they are. I'm louder. I'm Italian. I speak with my hands. And all of those things was intimidating to them. And so they felt like they couldn't compete with it. So they just took a secondary role. Now this one over here, she doesn't play that. So she's going to be my equal, whether I like it or not. And at first, I didn't understand that is what was happening. At first, I was like, and it would cause a lot of conflict, a lot of fights. And then I slowly started to realize, no, this is what I wanted. I had someone before that just let me have my way all the time, didn't question or challenge me, and I didn't feel the intimate connection there. I want that. I want her to trigger me, right? If it leads to, as long as I'm working through those triggers, it's a good thing because I'm improving. I'm becoming more emotionally mature, more spiritually mature. So I don't think anybody is condemned to have these, like, they don't have interpersonal skills. These are things that can be learned. They are learned. They're not, we're all born with the ability to connect on an emotional level. This isn't something that some people lack. Even sociopaths,
Yeah.
As she mentioned before, that she lives with a sociopath. I think even a sociopath, I don't necessarily believe that that's like some kind of medical condition, although I know psychology deems it like that.
I think the medical industry tends to just dismiss things as, this is just the way a person is and there's nothing we can do about it. Or we can just give them these pills and, we can put them to sleep for however long. But a lot of it comes, a lot of people have been healed from a lot of these psychological illnesses.
There were times that I acted like a sociopath without even realizing that's what I was doing. So I think that people who are labeled sociopaths or probably even psychopaths are just people who are so disconnected from their own emotions. Their ego has created such strong defense mechanisms, such walls, that they're completely disconnected from their emotions. And that's why they no longer feel guilt or empathy. And they can just do things that are totally socio or psychopathic, and they can live with themselves because they're really just cut off from their own soul, which I believe is where our emotions really root from. So, yeah.
It requires a lot of work, and that's really what this whole live stream is about the work that we're doing on a daily basis. And yeah, some of it comes in the form of tiny little arguments at the laundromat, and other stuff is much bigger. We've talked about in other episodes about childhood traumas that we've worked through, relationship traumas that we've worked through, and the work is never ending. And I think it's exciting when you have a partner that you're able to face these things with. As Danny was saying before, in the beginning, it may seem like a really big deal. It may seem like a huge offense. And then as time goes on, as you work through to heal some of these traumas, the offenses become a lot smaller. And now, yeah, we got into a fight at the laundromat that 15 minutes later we had made up about and said, wow, look at all of these things that we hadn't looked at. We hadn't looked at the fact that sometimes we communicate differently. We have different languages. We didn't look at the fact that, maybe I just pull like a meme, a saying from the internet, and I use it and don't really think about what the meaning behind it, right? Because to him, it was just like, what's so difficult about this question? And yeah, I have this meaning assigned to it that, is offensive. And so I was taken aback by it, and I was hurt by it. We're still learning that empathy is probably the quickest way to get those defenses down and be able to communicate more effectively. Without empathy, things tend to escalate a little bit more, and we end up getting into arguments about other subjects, all these other like outside things that don't really have to do with the core issue at hand.
Yeah. I want to address this comment from Emily. This is in reference to her previous comment about being in a relationship who doesn't have strong interpersonal skills or emotional intelligence, I would call it. Sometimes you have to accept that disability if you want to stay with that person. I'm going to strongly disagree there. You may have to be patient if someone is trying to. Vanessa was very patient with me as I learned emotional intelligence. But the reason we stayed together, or the reason she had that patience, is because she could see that I genuinely was working on myself and genuinely trying to become emotionally intelligent. I was not resisting and telling her to,
And there was a time where Danny did think, I just don't know how to empathize. That's just not who I am. I don't know if I'll ever learn how to do that. And those were moments where he was really frustrated and really like convinced himself, this is who I am and I can't change. And after some talking. We've been through therapy. We've read lots of books together. We've tried different healing modalities. And through some of that, he began to realize this isn't who I am. These are just things that I've learned over the years. These are defense mechanisms that I learned in order to protect myself from things that hurt me when I was a child. And I've just carried them with me and made them part of my personality. But that's not who I am. I don't have to be this person. Yeah. And it did take some time for me to help him realize that he didn't have to be a person who isn't as emotionally intelligent or as empathetic. It's just a matter of relearning things. Sometimes we have to unlearn the things that we've learned growing up and relearn new ideas, new ways of coping.
I think I would say for Emily, if that's the situation you feel like you're in, one thing that your partner may not realize, or the one that's less emotionally intelligent, they may not even realize that they're not emotionally intelligent. So bring it to their attention in a loving way if you can. And don't expect, sometimes they're going to be defensive right off the bat, right? But if you keep trying to communicate it to them and then they finally get it and then they start working on it, then great, then you can move together. If they don't, if they refuse, if I would have stayed in that place of this is just who I am, either accept it or that's it, right? At that point, you have to evaluate, is this a relationship I can stay in? Even if you love the person, you can legitimately love a person who does not want to progress, does not want to become more emotionally mature or spiritually. And you can decide that, I can't live in this kind of toxic environment. It also depends on the degree. If it's so toxic that it's sociopathic, then that's something you really need to evaluate whether or not it's fair to yourself to stay in that relationship. But at the same time, balance that with patience. If the person's really trying, then you can patiently help them along. I absolutely agree that some people just have a natural, Vanessa has just a very natural ability. And who knows if it's in her DNA or if it was how she was raised. It's probably both. She has a much more natural ability to empathize than I do. Or is it that, maybe it was just that I do have the same natural ability to empathize, but because of my childhood, where a lot of my expression was shamed, and I was a very emotional kid, and I was always told, don't be so emotional, it's feminine, right? So a lot of that was shame. That's the way I grew up. So maybe over time I shut down a lot of that empathy, and now I'm just relearning. It's not even that I'm learning how to empathize, I'm relearning how to empathize after shutting that down.
And I think it is part of our culture where we tell boys that it's not manly to be so emotional or to have so many feelings, whereas we're not teaching children how to be emotionally intelligent. It is okay to have emotions. Your emotions and your feelings are kind of your guidance system of whether what you're doing is right for you or not. If something doesn't feel good, it's not something you should be doing. If something your emotions are kind of like your compass in some way. And we don't teach kids how to use that compass. We just tell them this is right, this is wrong, these are the rules, and these are the rules that we follow as a society. But as we're learning, a lot of the rules that we have as a society aren't necessarily beneficial to us, to our children, to our society in general. We question why is society so messed up? It's because we're not living by our moral compass, by our internal compass. We're living by what society says we should or shouldn't do. And I think that, like you said, because a lot of your emotions were shut down as a child, it made it harder for him to empathize with my emotions, because he's like, why should I? We used to have these arguments at times where I would say something and I'm hurt by this, and he would say, well, there are times that I'm hurt by stuff, but I don't complain about it. I just suck it up. And I'm like,
and
okay,
there it is. There's the emotional unintelligence right there.
Well, don't suck it up. I want you to tell me what's bothering you. I want you to tell me if something that I'm doing is hurting you, because obviously I don't want to hurt you. You're my partner. I love you. I want to, I want us to be happy and live in harmony. So why wouldn't you communicate that? And yeah, I think both need to be willing do that work. And that was the reason why, despite the fact that we went through years of hell in our relationship, we were willing to stay with each other because we both wanted to have a closer connection.
Yeah.
We wanted to have a better relationship. We were both doing our part to get better at how we communicate and understand each other.
I think what Yvonne's saying, from the perspective of very traditional relationships, masculine men and feminine women, I think that we have been very programmed. And yes, women need to let men know what's in their heads and communicate clearly. And men have to be willing to, this is something that we've actually experienced. But I was not always willing to hear what she had to say. If what she had to say felt like an attack or felt like a criticism, I shut it down and I didn't want to hear it. So we as men also need to be willing, or we as the masculine partner need to be willing to hear those emotions and listen to them without judgment, without saying, oh, that feeling is silly, it's irrational. What do you want, your period? Those things. I mean, it sounds funny and it's so far removed from how we would even respond to each other now. But I mean, I feel like a couple of years ago, that wouldn't have been so crazy.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, those were my responses. And I think it's very common for men to respond that way. And not just men, but as a generality.
I was going to say that it is also very difficult for a lot of men to express their own emotions. And as women, we also have the opportunity to open that conversation. Danny used to laugh in the beginning of our relationship, saying that I never spoke about my emotions, that I kept everything in. And I did for a long time. I used to just suppress everything, not talk about it. Once I opened up, it was like, he was like, oh my God, too much. But I also wanted to hear, and I still want to hear, what he's feeling. There are plenty of times that we're taking a walk down a few blocks to go get dinner or something, and we're walking down the street, and I'm like, so what are you thinking? Or what are you feeling? Or, I'll ask questions about what he's been doing that day. Oh, well, what do you think about this? Or what do you feel about that? I try to pull that information because I know that for so many years, and this is one of the things about being vulnerable and open with each other, that I know that in his childhood, he wasn't given the opportunity to express his emotions as much. And so I make it a point to ask questions where it gives him the opportunity to express those emotions. And I try to listen and be empathetic so that he's more in the habit of expressing those things without me having to pull it out of him. And when you get to know your partner and you start realizing, a lot of people are afraid to be vulnerable, right? Because they say, if I share what my past hurts are, my partner is going to use them against me. But when you're in a loving relationship, that information is helpful. For me, it's very helpful because I know, we had the conversation about how I like having alone time. And for Danny, that used to translate to rejection. He would say, oh, she wants alone time. She just doesn't want to be around me. And so we do make an effort. There are moments where he'll tell me, like, if I'm leaving to the other room because he is doing research and I want to watch TV and I don't want to distract him, I'll tell him, I'm going to the other room because I want to watch TV and I don't want to distract you. I'll kiss him, before I leave. I know this is almost like an extra reminder that this is not rejection. I'm just going to go watch TV over there so I don't distract you. And they seem like little insignificant things. At this point, I think he probably knows that I'm not rejecting him. But sometimes if we're in a low vibration mood, if we're exhausted, it's easy to get those triggers to kick in and to have those feelings. So for us, that information, that vulnerability that we've had with each other is a resource where, we're a little bit more mindful and thoughtful when we're dealing with our partners so that we can continue building that trust and building that communication. And all of these little triggers are helpful. There's no need to shy away from the triggers because they add more tools into our little tool belt of things that we know in the future when there's a miscommunication. It's like, wait a minute. I know there's a language barrier at times. We speak different languages. Let's try to be clear about what we're saying so that this doesn't escalate into another fight. Now we know that even 8 years into our relationship, we still might miscommunicate over the definition of a word,
Yeah, I want to actually address Monique's comment. There's a lot to unpack here. We probably could do a whole show. Maybe we should do a whole show about this. I resonate a lot with this because for me, I'm a very sexual person. My love language is physical touch. And so therefore, I'm a very physical person, and I have always believed that, it's funny, right before I was getting married the first time, we were going through the marriage counseling. When you're in the Christian church, you have to do marriage counseling before you get married. And one of the things they taught was that women are emotional and men are sexual. And I questioned the pastor. I was like, I disagree. Yes, I think men to a larger degree, maybe, because I think this is debatable. I think women can be and should be, or not should be, but can be as sexual as men are. I think that they've just been shamed a lot more from expressing those feelings. But stereotypically speaking, men maybe tend to be more sexual or express their emotions, especially love, through sex and through sexual contact. But sex is absolutely a way that men connect emotionally. So using sex as a weapon, I'm going to deny you sex because, whatever it is, ranging from you don't listen to me to you didn't take out the garbage, is absolutely emotionally harmful. It can be definitely triggering to men. On the other hand, I would say that if a woman feels the urge, or if anybody feels the urge to use sex as a barter, it's probably because they don't feel heard, right? They're so desperate because I'm assuming they want to feel loved and connected as well. And like for Vanessa, she needs to feel emotionally safe and like we're in harmony for her to be physically open to me. And for me, when I don't feel in harmony, I want to be physical to get back that feeling of harmony. So we both have to compromise to where we can sit down, and if she can say to me now, there was a time when this would have caused problems in our relationship, but now she can say to me, I just don't feel connected right now. I feel like we've been like busy. We haven't been paying too much attention to each other. So, let's spend some time together before we just get right into it, right? And I think this is where foreplay kind of comes in. Like a lot of the stereotype is that guys just want to fuck. They're not so focused on the foreplay. I mean, I tend to be very focused on foreplay because I enjoy foreplay, but that comes back to my love language. So, what do you think?
No, I agree. I think using anything, abstaining from anything as a punishment or like Danny said, as some sort of barter is unhealthy. As we've learned over the course of our relationship, it always comes down to communication and being vulnerable with each other. After all of the work that we've done, we have created a space where we can be open with each other. Like Danny said in the beginning, maybe I would have said, like, I don't feel connected right now. Danny would have been like, well, what do you mean you don't feel connected? I've been here all day, right? But as we've worked through a lot of this stuff, and it requires unpacking a lot of your childhood traumas, unpacking a lot of your past relationship traumas. We carry all of this baggage. Everybody does. Everybody carries that baggage. And once we start to unpack it and release it, now we're not being triggered by our past relationships, because that's happened in the past where I'll say something and Danny feels like I'm criticizing him. I'm like, what are you talking about? I literally just suggested another way of doing something. And he will take that as criticism based on past relationships, based on, issues he had with his mom. And so he's really reacting to something else completely different from what's actually happening in the moment. But it requires us looking at those things from the past in order to release them and work through them so that when we communicate with each other, we know that it's just Danny right now communicating with Vanessa right now, and that's it. And that's, you've mentioned in the past, that's what being in the moment is. Be here now. We're with each other in this present moment, not reacting to, previous situations. And when that does happen, we're able to work through them. And the more we work through it, the freer we become, the less baggage we're carrying, the less barriers between us, and the more open we can be with each other.
Absolutely. Another episode flew right by.
Oh my God, I didn't realize.
We're at the hour. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We had a lot of great comments, so we appreciate that. We always like to see audience participation. It helps us to, we don't want to just be here preaching or just talking. We want to engage with you guys and hear other perspectives. And look, see, they say, people saying you're pretty. She needs to hear that sometimes. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Check us out on social media. Hit the follow button if you like this episode. If you feel like it had some value, share it. Share it with your friends on social media. Maybe somebody else could get some value out of it. We love you all. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Have a great Sunday. Danny's going to talk about our social media handles.
I'll pop these up. So you can
give us a follow.
Check us out on all the big social media companies, of course. But one of the things that I always like to talk about is Minds.com and Float app. These are two social media networks that do not censor, and they do not sell your information to outside companies. So, we all know Facebook and YouTube and Twitter openly are either openly banning certain content like anti-vaccine and certain freedom content. And they are also shadow banning, where they just kind of limit your exposure. So if you want to be with like-minded people on a social media app that functions, both of these apps function very similarly to Facebook, so you don't have to lose a lot of the functionality. Check them out, Minds.com and Float app. Give us a follow. And thank you very much, and we appreciate you being here.
We'll see you guys next week.
Take care.
Bye.